Hello and welcome. I saw a post some time ago on the NA forums by Flamets about the implications of IFHE on the game. And I noticed that there was this passage about the tier 10 German battleship, the Grosser Kurfürst. You see, apparently if you take IFHE on her, your secondaries will be able to penetrate 32mm of armor. This doesn't apply to any other ship except the Kurfürst and the Gneisenau. It doesn't apply to Bismarck, it doesn't apply to Friedrich der Grosse. But why this is significant is that pretty much all battleship bow and aft armor is 32mm, and if your HE can penetrate them, it can start dealing damage, because right now, they don't. If you have two battleships fighting each other, and they are at fairly close range, the secondaries do no damage. They do start fires, but they don't deal any damage. Except at very long range. This is why, for instance, if a Bismarck fights another Bismarck, the most amount of damage that their secondaries actually deal is at 8 kilometers ranges or more, because then the shells, can miss the ship by enough that they hit the superstructure to deal damage and penetrate. So, how does it work? Well, first of all, the skill can be found here. What it does is it increases your HE penetration by 30%, and it reduces your fire chance by 3%. Now, the way HE penetration works is that you take the caliber of the shell and you divide it by 6 to find out how much armor it can penetrate. But your armor penetration value has to be higher than the amount of armor it penetrates. Also, the number gets rounded to millimeters. So 20.5 millimeters gets rounded to 21 millimeters, and it can thus penetrate 20 millimeters of armor. 20.49 gets rounded to 20 millimeters, thus it can only penetrate 19 millimeters of armor. So, the way it normally works is that you take the caliber of the shell, let's say 120 millimeters, you divide it by 6, and now you have 20 millimeters of penetration on that 120 millimeter caliber HE shell. By the way, HE shell penetration does not care about angles at all. It can penetrate at extreme angles quite well. Now, for some reason, when German battleships were added, they were buffed in a way where their HE shells have an HE penetration of caliber divided by 4. So if you had, let's say, a German battleship gun or shell with 120 millimeter caliber, it would have 120 divided by 4 equals 30 millimeters of penetration. And this applies also to secondary guns. However, it only applies to secondary guns that are only used by German battleships. So any kinds of guns that are shared with things like German cruisers or German destroyers don't work. This is why it only applies to the Kurfürst and the Gneisenau, and this is why Bismarck and Friedrich der Grosse don't get any advantage from this. So, let's look at the comparison between with IFHE versus without. I showed you the Yamato and Montana armor models earlier. As you probably noticed, these secondaries are most effective if they fire at the front or rear of the ship. You see, the shells will penetrate regardless of the angle, so it is very brutal at close range when enemy ships are bow on or aft on towards you. However, if they are showing you broadside at close range, then your secondaries are aiming at the main belt, which they obviously cannot penetrate, and thus they don't deal damage. But then again, if the enemy ship is showing broadside, then you can just delete them with your main guns. And as you can see, the one with IFHE deals significantly more damage. So, I don't really know if this build is worth it, but it certainly works. The question is whether this secondary penetration is worth it to give up fire prevention for, because you can only take 3 tier 4 skills, and I don't know the answer to that. But right now it's definitely worth trying out, because you can just switch back for like 19 doubloons. I released a video today where I did actually try this build out. In that match I fought the Montana at close quarters. I was at around 5 kilometers from her. In the time of our fight, my secondaries hit her 65 times for 17,000 damage. At the same time, my main batteries hit her 15 times and did 0 damage. So, the IFHE Kurfürst has finished with her Yamato. She got a total of 287 secondary hits in 79 seconds, 81,120 alpha damage from secondaries, and 16,080 from one fire. And as you can see, IFHE makes the secondaries much deadlier against battleships. By the time the one with IFHE had already killed the Yamato, the other one had only got her Yamato to half HP. Without IFHE, it took 196 seconds, that's 2.5 times longer. In this time, there were a total of 717 secondary hits that did 51,000 alpha damage and 46,000 fire damage in 4 fires. IFHE would work with the same effectiveness against other battleships too, except the German ones. They're a bit special, but the secondary should still do alright. Also, the funny thing is that the secondaries with IFHE will be able to penetrate the deck armor of US battleships too. By the way, this is the skill build I was talking about earlier. You go double fighters, expert marksman, superintendent, advanced firing training, manual secondaries, IFHE, and then priority target. By the way, if you're interested in exploring other avenues of how to use IFHE, then IFHE has posted a list on Reddit about the data mine penetration values and their results if you have IFHE, so there's a link in the description to that below. If you like this video, then give it a like, if not, then give it a dislike, and thanks for watching.